Yeah, he is a broken record.
The Honourable Member for Bellay-Chambly. Mr. Speaker,
Oh,
all the parties in this House supported at
this is the man who's going to take down the government.
different measures. One, to help 1 million retirees in Quebec and across the country, and others to support farmers. We gave the government 5 weeks, and then the government said no. I'm wondering if the Prime Minister is saying that our proposal is bad because they voted in favor of it. And why does he not ask the relevance of the question to Quebecers with regard to his election? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the Bloc leader knows full well that in terms of protecting our farmers, we're moving forward and we're here to protect supply management. We're here to ensure that the Senate will adopt this legislation or an equivalent bill, because we'll always be here to protect our farmers. In terms of our seniors, we'll also always be here to protect them, whether it's in terms of dental care that has now been delivered to almost 1 million Canadians, particularly seniors. And we're also here to increase the GIS and extend OAS for older seniors. We're always going to be here for seniors. The Honourable Member for Bellay-Chambly. It's like the insane asylum. The Conservatives want to invest, table a motion to get rid of the government. They have to stop filibustering. And now the Conservatives are protecting the government, strangely enough. And now the Conservatives' obstruction seems to be in favor of the Liberals because they don't want to work more. Can we stop this nonsense and trigger an election, Mr. Speaker?
Wow! There it is. There it is. Don't mute the mic or I'll do another petition. Look at him.
The right.
He's not doing it. He didn't mute the mic.
Clearly see who is here in this House to play politics and who's here to work.
Look at him. He's not muting the mic.
I will ask the Prime Minister to start from the top, please. Mr. Speaker, we can clearly see who here in this House is here to play petty politics and who is here to deliver for Canadians. It's exactly what we are doing by providing dental care across this country to help almost 1 million Canadians with dental care. And we have been here to invest in more daycare spots, and we're going to continue to be here to deliver insulin free of charge for people who need it, who cannot afford it, and to provide contraceptives for people who need it. We have work to do, and we are doing it for Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Rogers is ripping off Canadians with hidden TV box fees. Again, the Conservatives laugh about this while Canadians get ripped off. Very interesting. The Liberals help them do it by allowing the merger, the multi-billion-dollar merger with Shaw. And the Conservatives not only are laughing, but they don't care about it because their Conservative leader gets big checks from Edward Rogers. Oh, that makes sense. I get it now.
Uh-oh. I think that breaks parliamentary privilege.
Colleagues,
is he going to mute it?
In order for us to get through question period and that's required,
because he read the petition,
that members not be interrupted and that the chair can hear the question, and invite the honourable member from Burnaby South to start from the top and to ask his question.
Yes.
I'm curious if the Conservatives are going to laugh again when I mention that Canadians are getting ripped off by Rogers, who is charging them hidden fees every month when they rent their TV box. Now, I know that the Liberals have helped Rogers do that by allowing the multi-billion-dollar merger with Shaw. The Conservatives don't care about helping Canadians because their leader gets big checks from Edward Rogers. But my question is to the Prime Minister. Will he commit today to forcing Rogers to reverse these fees or ban them from receiving any federal contracts?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past number of years, we've seen data fees and cell phone fees decrease across this country because of the efforts this government has brought in for more competition and for support for consumers. We know there's always more to do. We're going to continue to hold the telcos to account to deliver high-quality services to Canadians at affordable prices. That's something that we will continue to be there for.
Speaker, after 9 years, these NDP Liberals aren't worth the misery. Every month in Ontario, 750,000 people must rely on food banks to get by. That's up nearly 10% over last year.
Shameful.
Worse, monthly visits by Ontario's children are up almost 117% since 2019. Despite these record numbers of children relying on these food banks, the NDP Liberals continued to increase the carbon tax by 23%, on the way to actually quadrupling it, making groceries even more expensive. How many more families must suffer before the Prime Minister calls an election?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians have been facing challenges in these expensive times, and that's exactly why we've been delivering programs to help them. Our $10 a day childcare program, Mr. Speaker, is saving families thousands of dollars each and every year. The National School Food Program, Mr. Speaker, which will see 400,000.
Why does she talk like she's been bonked on the head and she's a little slower than normal?
Would like to make you think they are pro-family, but we know that they will cut these programs.
It's like that annoying teacher or school principal, you know?
The Honourable Member from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Just patronizing.
After 9 years, Indigenous peoples and families living in rural and remote Ontario know the NDP Liberals aren't worth the cost. The impact of the carbon tax on the cost of groceries is a real issue for those trying to make ends meet and feed their families. Hunger Count 2024 reports there are over 2 million visits to food banks across Canada in March of last year. That's up 90% since 2019. When will the Prime Minister stop ignoring the evidence, admit their carbon tax scheme isn't working, and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. For a moment, I thought my official critic was going to ask a question about Indigenous peoples, but again, we saw a return to their talking points, not the kinds of things that matter to the First Nations people that I've been working so hard with, along with my colleagues. In fact, that member voted against Indigenous health care, Grassy Narrows care home, emergency management support, schools, roads, housing, water.
Where's Miller's eyebrows?
They're no friends to Indigenous people.
Looks like a ginger Lex Luthor.
The Honourable Member from Coastal Bay Central, Notre Dame.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. Yesterday, Food Banks Canada reported that the need for food banks is spiralling out of control, with 2 million Canadians per month depending on them. Demand at Bridges to Hope Food Bank in St. John's is expected to surge 30% compared to 2023. Despite record-smashing food bank usage, the NDP Liberals increased the cost of groceries by raising the carbon tax 23%. Mr. Speaker, instead of quadrupling the carbon tax, will they axe the tax so that people can afford to eat?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, what they would axe in a place like Newfoundland, remember, the Conservative leader said the dental care program didn't exist. Right? Said it's not going to work, not going to happen. Newfoundland now happens to be one of the leading places in the country for people getting care. And on average, it's saving them $730. Do you know that what it's going to save our emergency rooms and creating space? About $1.8 billion, the opportunity to serve emergency rooms. Imagine those savings. That's what they're going to cut. So when they look vulnerable people in the eye, tell them the truth. Tell them what you're going to do. You're going to take away their dental care. You're going to make sure they don't get the diabetes medication they need, and that's going to cost them big money, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Kildonan and St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of Liberals,
Here we go.
crime is up and small businesses are fed up. The Liberal Prime Minister changed the laws to make it easier for violent repeat offenders to get bail, and now break-and-enters, thefts, vandalism have become everyday realities for small businesses in Canada. Nearly 60% of small businesses in BC, for example, are being directly impacted by crime. 8 in 10 are worried about their personal safety. This has cost businesses thousands of dollars, driving up costs of food and goods for their customers. When will the Liberals reverse their catch and release policy so that Canadians can shop safely and affordably once again?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spent 39 years fighting crime in the City of Toronto, and one of the things I learned in that 39 years is that cops count. But, Mr. Speaker, today there are 700 fewer police officers in the City of Toronto than when I was the police chief. And those are the same cops, by the way, who fought guns and gangs, gave evidence at bail hearings, and kept our neighbourhoods safe. But just like the Harper government that cut 1,000 RCMP positions, Conservative mayors and premiers have frozen police hiring. This is the price we're all paying for reckless Conservative cuts. And if the Conservatives are looking for causation of the rise in crime, look in the mirror.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Now, Liberals have allowed fraudulent, non-Indigenous insiders and shell companies to steal contracts that had been earmarked for Indigenous businesses. Now that companies like Canadian Healthcare Agency and Dalian Enterprises, who got over $100 million each, have been removed from the Indigenous business list, they should pay back the money that had been set aside for Indigenous companies. When will this government get our money back from bad actors who pretended to be Indigenous?
That's pretty weird.
The Honourable Minister of Public Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague knows full well that audits are done regularly to ensure that things are done properly. What my colleague has not said, though, is whether he is in favour of these targets to be granted to Indigenous businesses.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, I was dismayed that earlier in question period, in response to the Leader of the Opposition's question on housing, the Minister of Housing treated these questions like they were a joke. The reality, no, seriously, listen to them laugh now. Today, Scotiabank said that nearly 25% less Canadians can own a home now than when the minister took office. This is on top of the fact that housing has doubled under this government. Housing should be for everyone. Will the minister commit to axing the federal GST on new homes so that young Canadians can afford them?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question. And to be clear, what the Conservative Party announced yesterday was billions of dollars worth of cuts to programs that are actually going to get homes built in this country. While she has portrayed herself as having a moral high ground in her question, I would remind her that it is a Conservative leader who showed up in Niagara with a video crew so he could call a woman's home a shack. It was her leader who goes to encampments across this country, not to see what he can do to help people, to put them in the background of his social media videos for likes. Mr. Speaker, people who are unhoused are not political props. They are human beings that deserve to be treated with respect and dignity.
Half. Not even half of the Liberals stand up and clap.
From Calgary, Nose Hill.
The Housing Accelerator Fund doesn't actually directly build homes. Who said that? The Minister of Housing! This is the same man who juiced temporary visas knowing that students were sleeping under
You just misgendered Michelle.
and were performing sex
Assumed he was a man.
because they couldn't afford rent. This minister has been allowed to fail upwards. Even his caucus members know that. So when will the Prime Minister stop letting this minister fail upwards while Canadians are failing to pay their rent?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, the attempt to link very challenging life circumstances to the government's Housing Accelerator Fund is beyond disingenuous. She wants to talk about what her colleague members know. They know that this fund is actually helping get more housing built in this country. There is a number of them who are writing me personally asking that their communities be picked for funding because they know that it's going to succeed in building more homes in their cities. Mr. Speaker, my question is whether they will have the courage to actually stand up and tell their leader that he is wrong to make billions of dollars of cuts to housing like he was wrong when he did it when he was the minister.
Yeah, sit back down, Sean.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Aides-Chemin-Lévis. After 9 years, the Bloc Liberal government has broken home ownership with rents and mortgage payments doubling. Today, 80% of Canadians believe that home ownership is reserved for the very rich. The Conservative leader is proposing to axe the GST on new homes, which will save $40,000 in mortgage payments on an $800,000 home. Will the government implement this proposal or continue to burden Canadians with ineffective programs, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Economic Development. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to be clear. What the Conservative Party is proposed yesterday is to cut the building of 8,000 affordable housing units in Quebec. I want to know if this member from Quebec, well, how they explain this to Quebecers, that they're cutting 8,000 affordable housing units. That's what this...
She's the only one that has like a artisan poppy.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Levy.
Mr. Speaker, believe me, the Conservative leader built 195,000.
Yeah, her poppy's like dead or something.
Housing minister, which proves his competence. However, the Liberals continue to show their incompetence by doubling the cost of mortgage. When is the government going to allow Canadians to choose a common sense option to please Canadians by launching an election?
Well, we're going to find out today if the Bloc puts it forward.
And economic development. Mr. Speaker, you know, when we talk about a housing crisis, we talk about housing supply, and this means affordable and social housing. Mr. Speaker, it's great that they're boasting about building housing, but we have built social housing that was affordable as well. And I repeat, Mr. Speaker, to the Conservative Party, 6 is the number of social housing units that they built. And when my family and I were looking for housing under the Conservative reign, we didn't find any social housing because they don't care about vulnerable people, and they don't care if people can pay for housing.
Quite literally the opposite.
The Honourable Member from Victoria.
It's our body, our lives, our choice. Abortion care is health care. But the Liberals keep...
That only applies in certain instances, right? The our body, our choice.
These Conservatives creep anti-choice legislation into Canada. Conservative cuts mean no family doctors, no midwives, no nurses to staff clinics. This isn't real access. Everyone should be able to get health care when they need it, including abortion care. Will the Liberals enforce the Canada Health Act to stop Conservative attacks on abortion?
The Honourable Minister for Women and Gender Equality.
Mr. Speaker, our message is clear. The right to an abortion and access to abortion go hand in hand, yet there are a growing number of anti-choice pregnancy crisis centers that use deceptive tactics to deter women from making informed choices about their reproductive health. That's why today I introduced a motion to require more transparency from these centers providing pregnancy counseling. Organizations that do not clearly or prominently provide this information to clients risk losing their charitable status. This is about holding them accountable. This is about supports that women can rely on.
The Honourable Member from Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, last week the U.S. Department of Transport fined American Airlines $50 million for its horrible treatment of people with disabilities. Well, here in Canada, people have been dropped on the floor, they've had their wheelchairs broken and lost. One even had to drag themselves off a plane by their arms. And this government's response, wait for it, the minister held a summit with plenty of nice words and zero action. Why is it that the Americans get a Secretary of Transport that stands up for passengers, while here in Canada we get ministers of transport that continually cave to the big airlines?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board and Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to differ. I'm standing up in this House today after meeting with our government's Chief Accessibility Officer to definitively emphasize how important passenger safety and accessibility is for this government. And I will repeat that over and over again in this House and outside of this House. There is nothing more important than non-discrimination and more accessibility and safety for our air passengers, rail passengers and freight passengers also. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this Liberal NDP government is not worth the cost. Mr. Speaker, over 2 million Canadians use a food bank on a monthly basis. In Calgary, food bank use is up 28% over the last year, and that's because this Liberal NDP government put a 23% punitive carbon tax on everything. So will this Prime Minister do the right thing, take responsibility for the mess that he created, and call a carbon tax election?
I love how she just ramps things up.
Children and social development.
Mr. Speaker, I challenge that member to point to a single thing that the Conservatives have done to help Canadians that are struggling. And it's easy. She can't, Mr. Speaker. It's appalling, Mr. Speaker. The three-word slogans on that side of the House are empty words. On this side of the House, we continue to make investments in things like the Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker, the Canada Carbon Rebate, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we'll continue fighting for Canadian families.
The honourable member from Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, the numbers don't lie. The Calgary Food Bank paid $10,000 in carbon tax, and that was to facilitate 41,000 visits. And that's because food bank use is up 300% since 2019, the year that the Liberal NDP government implemented their punitive carbon tax.
Yeah.
So will the Prime Minister do the right thing, take responsibility for the mess that he created, for the Canadians that he drove to the food bank, and call a carbon tax election?
Holy smokes!
The Honourable Minister for Employment, Workforce Development and Official Languages.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member wants to talk about numbers and facts, so let's talk about the numbers and facts. 8 out of 10 Albertans get more money back from the Canada Carbon Rebate than they pay in the price on pollution. But, Mr. Speaker, the best solution to people who are struggling is a good job. $22 billion in investments from this government into the energy sector, into clean electricity, into carbon capture, use and storage, $25 billion for the healthcare system. Do you know what the price for a Conservative government would be, Mr. Speaker? $20,000 per Alberta family with one kid. That's a tax nobody can afford.
The honourable member from Portage-Lisgar.
After 9 years, these NDP Liberals are simply not worth the cost. Food Banks Canada reveals a devastating truth. Over 2 million Canadians are turning to food banks. They also report that up to 25% of Canadians are living in a state of poverty. In Manitoba, food bank usage has surged by 30% in just the last year alone. And despite this crisis, the Prime Minister still thinks it's some sort of a brilliant idea to quadruple the carbon tax. So when will the Prime Minister put an end to this misery and finally just call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity recently to be in Manitoba and to announce that Manitoba has signed on to our National School Food Program. This year alone, Mr. Speaker, 19,000 additional kids in that province will receive food at school through this program.
What's with the mask in the background?
Real children and real food, not the bureaucracy that the leader of the Conservatives would like to claim that this program is. That's the impact of the work that we're doing as we roll out this program across the country.
The honourable member from Portage-Lisgar.
Canadians recognize the impact of this Liberal government's policies, and it's that they're being recklessly driven into poverty. How many more families have to suffer? How long do the lineups at food banks need to be before this Prime Minister realizes that he and his government are the cause? Because if you tax the farmer who grows the food, the trucker who ships the food, and the grocer who sells the food, how can he be surprised when we're seeing record-breaking food bank use? Canadians want a carbon tax election. When will this Prime Minister give it to them?
There you go, making a name for yourself.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Mr. Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader doesn't usually give press conferences. That's why it's understandable that he goofed yesterday, and he admitted his true plan. He said we're going to cut 2 programs for sure and more beyond that. So now we all
She's almost the same height standing up as Justin Trudeau is sitting down.
They're going to cut that school food program that's going to feed 400,000 kids. They're going to cut dental care that has provided care to 1 million Canadians. They're going to cut pharmacare. They're going to cut early learning and childcare. But we won't let them.
Not that height matters. Not that height matters.